Whew. Bloody hell. Oof. Hoop. Oh. Oof. Bloody hell. Only me. We're here to talk about the Velocette Mk VIII KTT. And don't be thinking I've brought you to a graveyard because everything's finished, it's dead and gone, and buried, and a memorial because no, we're very much alive and kicking and living the good life with these Velocettes. But no, I was just particularly struck by this particular graveyard, and I thought there was a nice, I'll just explain why, and I just think there's a really great concept here. So what are we looking at? It's a this is the Reese family. Now, all due respect to them, there's absolutely no connection to me or to the bikes there, but there's, you know, there's a family here, and it's a particularly beautiful grave. We've got a very, you know, substantial piece of granite, and it is shaped much like in plan view a cross, which is symbolic to many, and as in form it's something like a cathedral, so it has a sectional kind of presence like a building, and yeah, very kind of formally laid out. And you know, I just think that graveyards such as this are like a museum to humanity. You know, there's never been and there will never again be such monuments made to individuals, couples, families, children, just people's lives in this way, using quality materials, taking up real estate. So it's, in a way, this is a moment in time. But in addition here, more than what was planned and designed and went in originally when these folk were buried, is this tree which is growing as if coming out of the head of the figure under the cross. So it's this wonderful kind of living object surrounded by the patina of time and these permanent materials, not degrading so much but showing their age. And there's this just fantastic, in my mind anyway, concept of this life or thought or a continuance that is still with us, and that is, I find that just really striking. And as well as that, it creates this wonderful canopy which sits over the entire family, shading them, shading its own roots, shading the grave, and giving it a living presence. And I just think, you know, like a really great artwork that has a concept associated with it, it's the sum of its parts is so much more than its parts and kind of becomes something else. And that, I think, is what the KTT, and especially the Mk VIII, is. It is more than the sum of its parts. The Mark VIII came out in 1939. We've already had a look at some Mark Is now. Without going into great detail, the Mark I, 2, 3, 4, there were precious little changes within that time. Perhaps the biggest would have been the move from a 3-speed hand change to a 4-speed. The Mark IV, some of the Mark IVs had a bronze head, 19-inch rear wheel. All KTTs had a 21-inch front wheel until the very end. Now a Mark V had the cradle frame. So that was the frame that was designed, used on the big Velo, which we've also seen. The Mark VI was a curious little bike, and of course the KSS Mark II was a thing that was redesigned from the earlier machines that had exposed hairpin valve springs. So the Mark II was all enclosed, all aluminium engine, and would have been a real pleasure in terms of oil tightness. The Mark VII and Mark VIII, big fins on the head, which were getting them out into the cooler air, well, that was the theory, and there was the allocation to house the hairpin valve springs. And of course, we need to understand that with racing, controlling valves was the name of the game, really, because if you've ever seen you know, valve springs in action on a stroboscope, you'll see what they're up against. You know, it's a pretty violent kind of activity, opening and closing many times per second. So Mark VII was effectively one of these with a rigid rear end. Now we already know that the factory was using Springer rear ends from 1936. So the Mark VII had this engine. For 1937, the factory, with their own racing, went to these beautiful Huntley and Palmer biscuit box size heads and an equally large round barrel. Fantastically big, handsome finning. But in 1938, the factory came up with essentially a bike like this for Stanley Woods, who won the TT, the junior TT, and in 1939, on the cusp of war, did the same thing. Now this is a part of the sort of Velocette history that Harold Willis at that time was unwell and died. I think even it might be a day before the junior race in 1939. So it was very poignant that essentially what was the Mark VIII KTT, but a works version, won that junior. And come post-war, not to diminish those years, Freddie Frith in the 1948, I think, season, which was newly formulated to be a world championship, won every race and was world champion, and was one of the few guys that was a successful rider before the war and after the war. In 1949, I believe, Bob Foster also took the world championship on one of these. So a motorbike, in my view at least, as well as being a sum of its parts, can only be a truly successful thing via its use. So, you know, no show ponies can really apply for being a successful motorcycle. Now there is no doubt that KTTs were purposeful, and I think this machine, and I know that many would agree, exemplifies possibly the most elegant, handsome, well-proportioned machine, which in a way epitomised that period between World War I and World War II, where there was a real desire to find beauty in machines. And that was a wonderful period. I mean, you know, no man, also in my opinion, should ever pick up a weapon and hurt another man, but what has come out of these wars, or between these wars, was this amazing time where the revolution of speed and the excitement of, you know, new designs and racing and getting things better and better technically was a real tumble, you know. So if you sort of look from the bicycle to one of these, there's this terrific kind of sense that an artwork, if you like, evolving as the bikes progressed, and the fact that it ran through a good kind of 15 years of real focus, and every year being tested at the TT, which was always the place where everything was on show and showing its mettle. And from 1907, always the place where the most important road races in the world were taking place. Come 1950, you still buy one of these, and plenty of people did. And interestingly enough, plenty of people who did buy these would enter them not only in the junior, but in the senior as well. And if you look at the records, and the Isle of Man have a brilliant website which shows the records of every rider, every year, both classes, junior and senior, and you'll see that Velocette dominated the junior class for that period, and also had multiple entries and very high placings with 350s in the 500 class. So after the war, machines like this, because they were effectively exactly pre-war replicas, and I think I'm right, there might have only been about 50 or so Mark VIIIs made in 1939 and can effectively be pre-war. And I think basically the only difference might be, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the pre-war ones had steel rims and the post-war had aluminium rims. So effectively you're talking about taking pre-war technology and applying it to a post-war racing environment. Come the 50s, of course, we were talking suspension, lower frontal area, and Velocettes right from the beginning with their rear suspension were using these oleomatic struts at the rear, which were an air sprung oil damped unit. Lovely idea, and Oleomatic were making landing gear for aeroplanes. In a TT environment where you might have 3 or 4 hours of racing, it's pretty hard with the technology then to keep air in. And students of this will know, Bill Lomas in his excellent autobiography is quite critical of the fact that there just wasn't enough damping, and the factory wouldn't allow the use of anything other than these oleomatics. The engine was strong, and I think everybody, with the exception of Motor Guzzi in the 50s, with single cylinder racing engines, took some time to gather the kind of reliability and power that the Mark VIII KTT had. This machine, which I think is 1041, KTT 1041, so that would be 47, 48, was owned by a fella by the name of Arthur Wheeler, and he was a dealer, a privateer, and also did some factory riding for Velis and for Moto Guzzi in that early post-war period, with some success. You can look him up, and he owned this machine pretty much from the beginning and until, I can't tell you, maybe the early 1990s, mid 1990s, something like that, and reputedly swapped it for a Moto Guzzi that I could be wrong, but I think we're talking one of the Fergus Anderson works machines that went to Australia, stayed there. Arthur Wheeler would have known that bike and decided that he would swap his Mark VIII to get it. So it came to our side of the world, if you like, and I kind of couldn't believe that, because it is probably one of the few that have been kept intact, used. This was always a good one. It's one of the few genuine articles, and I think I might be right in saying that it's quite likely the only one in the world which is being used, which is correct, largely correct, and still, you know, responsibly being raced. I think I'm right also in saying that the late Graham Rhodes was the last person to enter a Mark VIII KTT in what would have been the Manx Grand Prix at the Isle of Man, and rode it, you know, with a lot of spirit. I mean, he won the senior on a G50 in 2005, I think, bless him. And yeah, I believe, I can't tell you the figure exactly, but he was circulating in the kind of mid to late 80 mile per hour per lap, which is exactly where Frith and the like were in the late 40s. So a genuine effort. This kind of pedigree where it's all out of use. I mean, we're not talking about something which is polished, but we are talking about something which is useful. So season after season, race after race, just with good care and maintenance, it's still nice. And much like I was saying before, it takes a really good pre-war 500 to beat this thing. And yeah, it's you know, been a great pleasure. So I know I keep banging on a little bit about the bikes being artworks and relating the bikes in concept to the grave site where there's a living element, but bear with me, because we are effectively just talking about bits of metal here, but to those that kind of get it, I suppose, or that are interested in such things, they're a whole lot more than that, and I don't know that that's an easy thing to explain. And to those that don't get it or aren't interested, it's even harder to explain, but I'll kind of give it a go from my perspective. So we can definitely say that beauty in a way is understood, or quite a lot of the elements of beauty are understood. We've got proportion, we've got, you know, things like reproduction, colour, form, line, and practicality. So we could definitely say that something like the David of Michelangelo is beautiful for lots of reasons. Now, if we said that the David was a piece of marble in the same way that motorbikes are just bits of metal, then we get a bit of a window into it, because obviously it's what was done to that piece of marble and who did it. So you know, a capable person with a really good idea and the ability to demonstrate that idea was, you know, important. And everything from there is kind of what we've done. So we, if you like, the viewers, have, you know, looked at it and loved it and kind of wondered about it and understood it to a degree, and we've put this extra presence, we've made it in a way divine. I mean, that idea of a sum of its parts, we can relate to lots of things, you know, and it depends a lot on our knowledge, our experience, our understanding, but I think almost every individual gets this idea that when something goes beyond the bits that make it up, it becomes special. So that could be, you know, a song, a very beautiful dance. It could be for some, you know, the climbing of a mountain. It doesn't matter. It could be eating a bit of cake, I suppose. But if it's possible to get beyond, then we go to a place where, you know, we're taken away, we're swept away. The difference, of course, between a motorbike and a traditional artwork, I mean, these are objects in the same way that the David or a sculpture is an object, but these have a use, and it is in a way their use which helps to transcend the sum of the parts. I mean, with an artwork, you have to, I don't know, wait and see whether time and people will allow a thing to truly float to the top. And of course, with artwork, you are looking in a way to push boundaries and to represent who we are and where we are. But of course, you can make a claim for something, and you don't really know that what you're claiming is going to really be borne out as being important. When it comes to a motorbike, you simply can't sit there and claim that this is a wonderful thing, or that claim that this is the best thing in the world. You have to put it to the test. And putting it to the test requires a connection. So you've got the person and the machine and, let's say, the competition. It can also, you can also get this feeling, and many motorcyclists throughout history have had this connection, even riding, touring, whatever they do. But in competition, there's a certain kind of connection because you are committed. You are absolutely putting yourself on the line. You are asking absolutely everything of the machine, you know, so the thing can be screaming at the top of its rev limit, the tyres can be screeching, the brakes can be steaming, and you, the rider, are at the edge. You're not just having a go, you are a person with ability, and you've brought to the table that ability which you've built up over your entire lifetime. All of your strength and skill you're putting on the table, and you're putting it on the line because you might die at any moment in this activity. And it is those moments, that connection, when all of those complicated things come together, that you really are living. In that moment, it's a bit like a drug. You know, you are part of the world, but you're removed from the world. It's like you're looking back and you recognize things, but you're elevated, you're flying, it's as though you're in a dream and you are just away. But you also know that you're committed to the extent that you cannot back out and you don't want to back out. And so it's an extreme thing. I think what I'm saying is that there's a kind of I don't know, some kind of symphonic synergy, I suppose, when all of those parts come together. And a lot of those parts are just very simple, but the combination of them all is complex. You know, we have technicalities, you have situations to do with the surface and the conditions, you have your own ability, all of this stuff is on the line, and all of this stuff has to kind of blend to gather one of these moments. And when those moments come about, and we're talking about, you know, we've looked at these various wins and world championships and the like, that's truly special. And that kind of synergy is, in my mind, really beautiful.